Hey guys, this is Nick and welcome to your Linux and open source news for the end of September. This time we have Red Hat hiring for HDR support on Linux, Firefox making more controversial decisions, and support for Linux from the major anti-cheat providers, among a lot of other Linux gaming news. Let's get started right after a word from our sponsor. So this video is sponsored by QEMU Care. Basically, every sysadmin knows how to manually update QEMU, but this generally involves shutting down your VMs, updating QEMU, restarting everything, or migrating your VMs to another server while you're updating QEMU. It's a long and bothersome process. QEMU Care lets you live patch these virtual machines, so you can make sure that they're as secure as possible without them going down. It lets you avoid doing complex migrations with your QEMU or KVM machines while you're doing maintenance, as QEMU itself will be live patched as your virtual machines are still running. You don't even need any specific maintenance window, because patching happens in the background, transparently, while your VM still operates normally. So if you want to see how that all works and get your free trial, click the link in the description below. Okay, let's begin with the Linux news. Red Hat seems to be hiring to finally have good HDR support on Linux. They're looking for a software engineer who would focus on Linux HDR support, kernel drivers, Wayland, and the GNOME desktop. HDR support on Linux is currently non-existent, with every major graphics hardware manufacturer trying to work on their own implementation for either X.org or Wayland, without really reaching any usable point on either of these. While HDR content isn't really all that prevalent yet, it's good to try and future-proof our graphical stack, and the fact that my monitor is HDR capable has nothing to do with me saying that. Anyway, if you're interested and have the skills, I left the link to the job offer in the description. Linux Mint has finally revamped their website, which was getting long in the tooth. It's looking much more modern, with a lot more detail on the distro itself and a completely reorganized navigation. Now you might think that no one cares about a website, but presentation is crucial to get newcomers interested and feeling safe, and old-looking websites generally don't have that effect. As Mint is more focused on newcomers, being a really beginner-friendly distribution, it's only fair that their website would reflect that inclination, with a classy, modern look and a very detailed FAQ to guide beginners. Jordan Petridis, a GNOME developer, wrote a blog post about the recent drama about libadwaita and theming. While it's a bit more inflammatory than I would have liked, it also explains the technical limitations of GTK and libadwaita, and why the GNOME team feels it necessary to hard-code the Advaita theme in libadwaita. He also talks about the coloring API they propose to alleviate the inconvenience other actors might experience as a result. Reading it won't change your mind if you're fervently opposed to this, but it brings more detail on the technical reasoning about this planned change. I still plan to cover all of this in a dedicated video this month, after I reach out to GNOME developers and distribution maintainers to get both sides of the issue and make something as objective as I can. Google seems to want to bring the Android kernel closer to mainline Linux. They are moving to a new upstream model and away from their current forking model. With Android 12, Google will ship generic kernel images to their end users. Usually, the Linux kernel you get in an Android phone has seen multiple forks, one from Google, then one from the system-on-a-chip vendors for each SoC, then one for each device to add specific support. This means that Android kernels are extremely messy, and fixing bugs on them is a nightmare. Google's goal to fix this is just forking the kernel once, and then allowing vendors to add their drivers with plugin modules. This new method won't be really functional before 2023, but it should allow Android phones to get updates to the kernel a lot more frequently and in a lot more timely fashion. GNOME 41 was released. This new version brings a redesigned GNOME software, which will do a much better job at letting users discover and read up on applications they can install. Category pages have also been vastly improved with specific picks to guide new users towards apps they might not know about, and the app details pages also have received a lot of love. They now showcase the download size of each app, its compatibility with various device form factors, their age rating or security rating. GNOME 41 also improves performance for Mutter, the window manager, and updates most of the core apps with quality of life improvements. I have a dedicated video on the channel, check it out in the card up top if you missed it. Christian Schaller, the senior desktop manager at Red Hat, outlined the vision that Fedora has for the future of the Linux desktop. This lengthy but interesting blog post outlines and weaves most of the latest technologies that Fedora has been implementing over the years, or is looking to implement, including Flatpak for applications, OS 3 for a stable, immutable OS base, Toolbox for developers using Silverblue as their main desktop, Wayland as the display server, or Pipewire to help with doing screen capture and audio management in a more secure manner. He also goes over the problems, expected or not, that went into developing or working on these various technologies. It's a very interesting blog post if you're interested in all these technologies or don't understand why they need to be developed in the first place. Now let's move on to application, and it's only Firefox. Firefox seems to be experimenting with using Bing as the default search engine. It's only the case for 1% of the user base of Firefox on the desktop, and it's a study that will last until early 2022. This test is probably the result of the expiration date of the contract Firefox has with Google, which should come in 2023. They're probably trying to have a backup plan, or maybe Bing has offered more than Google, and Firefox would like to exit their current precarious position, being completely dependent on Google for revenue. In any case, I would be surprised if Firefox users welcome the change, as Microsoft seems to be even more reviled than Google in the open source and free software community that represents most of the remaining Firefox users, myself included. Now, in a maybe even more controversial decision, Firefox will be shipped as a snap by default on Ubuntu. The current Debian package shipped in the Ubuntu repos for Firefox will be replaced with a snap, starting with Ubuntu 21.10. Apparently, Mozilla asked for it, so they can ensure that updates will be applied directly to the browser when Mozilla releases them and not when package maintainers have had the time to do so. Currently, canonical developers have to package, test, upload, and release Firefox each time there's an update, for multiple architectures and multiple versions of Ubuntu. It's time-consuming, and it leads to vulnerable browsers being left in the wild. It seems that downstream distros based on Ubuntu won't be affected for now, and that the deb package will stay available. I would expect most Ubuntu-based distros to move to shipping the Flatpak version of Firefox instead. Now let's move on to the second half of this video, which is exclusively about Linux gaming. There's been tons of stuff going on. The first one is a nice achievement for Proton, as the experimental branch managed to receive updates to get Deathloop to run on day one on Linux, on AMD and NVIDIA GPUs. It's really encouraging to see that Valve and Codeweavers are working as hard as they can to ensure that Linux gamers can have access to the same games as Windows users on the same day. I really want to try Deathloop as well now, as it's the latest release from the Dishonored developers, and these games are probably my favorites of all time. Now, ray tracing on AMD GPUs is also getting closer to being a reality. While, for once, NVIDIA users have enjoyed RTX support for a while now, the AMD situation wasn't as brilliant. After 9 months of work, games are starting to work, including Control, Quake 2 RTX, or Metro Exodus. Interestingly, these games use either Direct3D or Vulkan. There is, of course, a lot of work to be done still. The code isn't upstreamed yet to the Mesa repositories, and performance isn't up to par just yet, but we're getting close to a workable implementation here. DXVK 1.9.2 was released. The DirectX 9, 10, and 11 to Vulkan translation layer got a lot of bug fixes and improvements. CPU overhead has been reduced for DirectX 9 games, and a bunch of games have received fixes, including Call of Cthulhu, Crysis 3, Homefront: The Revolution, Medieval 2 Total War, Need for Speed Heat, Pathfinder: Wrath of the Righteous, or Payday. As always, this new release will be picked up and packaged in a Proton update sometime soon. All you have to do is wait a bit. NVIDIA released a new driver update for Linux, version 470.74. It fixes an issue that made a lot of DirectX 12 games unplayable due to high memory consumption using Proton. It also disables FXAA for Firefox to avoid visual corruption, as well as fixing a Vulkan performance regression and a crash on the Linux kernel 5.14. I didn't get the update yet on Manjaro, but it might already have landed in various PPAs or more bleeding-edge distributions. Valve has published an official FAQ for the Steam Deck. It addresses a bunch of questions, including can you have multiple Steam accounts on the same device, Can you run non-Steam games? Will there be an add game feature? Does the audio jack support microphones? Will Proton improvements make it to other Linux distributions? Can you use the Steam Deck as a PC controller? Can you boot another OS off the SD card? Or is the touchscreen multi-touch? And the answer to all of these, by the way, is yes. It also mentions that the Steam Deck won't support external GPUs, that docking doesn't improve performance, and that VR might work, but performance will probably be terrible. Now to the main big gaming news. Epic and BattlEye both announced support for Linux, including Wine and Proton. This means Easy Anti-Cheat and BattlEye will both be able to run on Linux, apparently without kernel modules, nor limited to SteamOS. It will be available on any Linux distro you want. Of course, there's a catch. Developers have to opt in to this support, and they will probably want to do some testing and quality assessment before rolling this out to everyone. Some developers might never enable that support either if they don't feel it brings enough security. In any case, the support is here, and I would be surprised if no developer ever got around to enabling support for it. It doesn't seem to be very complex to do, and it would earn them bonus points with our very vocal community. I have a dedicated video on the topic, check it out in the card up top. Wine 6.18 was released. It converts Shell32 and WineBus to the PE executable format. It updates the Mono engine and enables HID joystick support. It also fixes 19 bugs, including for MP GUI, Resident Evil 7, Windows ISO downloader, and a lot of more generic issues that might affect other programs. And finally, Proton 6.3-7 was released, using DXVK 1.9.2, which I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the latest development work of VKD3D, and it makes a few new games playable, like Life is Strange True Colors, Divinity Original Sin 2, which was working before but was broken after a game update, and PES 2021. It also fixes an issue in Resident Evil Village and improves the windowing for Forza Horizon 4. As always, you should get the update directly through Steam. This video was made possible by Slimbook. If you don't know about them by now, they are based in Valencia, Spain. They make Linux desktops, laptops, any budget, any power, any keyboard layout, and they ship virtually everywhere in the world. Check out the link in the description below to look at their devices. So thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And if you didn't, you can also dislike and tell me why in the comments. You can also watch all of my stuff on Odyssey, and if you want to support the channel, you can join my Patreon subscribers and YouTube members, and you'll get access to a weekly Patreon cast and the right to vote on the next topics I'll cover. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!